Good day. Thank you for attending Clearing the Air, Allentown's web presentation outlining the superior airflow performance of our XJ system. Let's jump right in with an overview of the topics we'll be discussing. To begin with, we'll step through a brief description of the XJ system, detailing its design, form, and function. Following that, we'll get to the meat of our discussion by reviewing a battery of tests recently performed on the XJ, along with the results of this testing. So let's start with the design, form, and function of the XJ cage. The XJ cage, indeed the complete XJ system, was designed for global compatibility. The cage is 500 square centimeters with a 12 centimeter or 5-inch interior height to meet this standard. You might think that a cage of this capacity would be cumbersome and bulky in the rack, but in fact the reverse is true. The unique shape and design of the XJ cage, with its sloped lower front region, maximizes rack space, allowing a greater allotment of cages while still permitting access to an external water bottle. The XJ cage also has a great many value-add additional features, including optional lid locks, a silicone gasket in the lid to provide a more secure seal. The cage itself is constructed from clear polysulfone to provide maximum visibility, a HEPA-grade lid filter, an easy-to-open hinged retainer for easier access to this filter, and the option for an external water bottle when applicable. So let's turn our attention now to the ventilation of that cage. The XJ cage, indeed all Allentown cages, employ our proven and time-tested cage-level airflow system. This is where air is introduced into the cage at the bottom, just above the bedding through the use of our special air diffuser, and removed at the top in the lid. This cage-level process has many advantages compared to those caging providers who both introduce and remove air in the lid. These include superior diffusion of the air, resulting in a lower velocity, the fact that in our system, the air flows with the laws of convection from the bottom to the top, more effectively removing contaminants, and drier bedding as a result of having the air introduced more closely to the wet surfaces. In terms of flexibility, the XJ can perform in either the positive or the negative mode. The validity and superiority of the Allentown airflow system can be inferred from the fact that over 2 million cages with this type of airflow are currently in use worldwide. More importantly, Allentown's cage-level airflow system has been validated by an impressive number of industry leaders, and we'll review the comments of just some of those individuals a little later on in the presentation. So now let's talk a bit about the ventilation of the XJ rack. The XJ rack is a low-pressure system that allows for consistent air changes across the board. The system is easily maintained and cleaned through the use of our highly accessible and visible manifolds. No disassembly is required to clean the XJ rack. In terms of providing air to the rack, the XJ is compatible with all manner of airflow systems, including dedicated blowers, so-called daisy chain systems where one blower supplies multiple racks, and Allentown's unique interstitial systems where airflow is provided and maintained in the space above the ceiling. Now let's move on to actual performance testing recently conducted on the XJ. For the microenvironment, 3 concurrent tests were recently performed. A 14-day test where the system was observed in its normal operation, essentially to provide a series of baseline results. A second test where a 3-day power failure was simulated to effectively mimic what might occur over a weekend. And a third static operation test for the sake of completeness. In the 14-day regular operation test, 8 cages were observed, each with 5 male mice on 1/8-inch corncob bedding. Daily measurements were taken of ammonia and carbon dioxide. In regard to ammonia levels, and as you can see in the chart before you, in the first 4 days of testing, ammonia levels remained effectively at 0, with an even progression following for the remainder of the test. At no time did the levels rise to or exceed the accepted limit of 25 parts per million. In fact, levels stayed well below this threshold for the entire 14 days. Carbon dioxide levels were also safely maintained according to our testing. Once again, as you can see in the chart before you, during the 14-day period, in normal operation, CO2 levels within the cage stayed well below accepted limits in a ventilated environment. Having confirmed that the XJ system performed successfully while operating under normal conditions, we wanted to test what would happen in the unlikely but possible event of a power failure. Worst case scenario occurring on a Friday and persisting until the following Monday. It was a 12-day test overall, but with a simulated power failure on day 4 lasting until day 7. Once again, 8 cages were observed, each with 5 male mice on 1/8-inch corncob bedding. Daily measurements were taken of ammonia and carbon dioxide. As you can see in the chart, before, during, and after the power failure, CO2 levels stayed well below accepted limits. Most importantly, the mortality rate for the mice involved was 0. Regarding ammonia, we see, as before, levels remaining effectively at 0 for the first 4 days, with a slight rise and spike during the power failure, never approaching dangerous levels, however. This was followed by a return to a more even progression after the power failure and persisting until the end of the test. Once again, levels stayed well below accepted limits before, during, and after the power failure. Although the XJ cage is not intended to perform consistently in the static mode, we wanted to see what would happen if it needed to for more than a weekend power failure. And once again, we found the XJ equal to the task. The test was conducted for 6 days using 16 cages, each containing 5 male mice on 1/8-inch corncob bedding. Again, daily measurements were taken of ammonia and carbon dioxide. Once again, ammonia levels remained below accepted limits, while carbon dioxide levels also stayed below accepted limits for a static environment with 0 mortality in the mice. The next test performed was on airflow consistency and balance along the XJ rack. The test was conducted on an 81-cage single-face and a 126-cage double-face XJ rack. What you see before you is a mapped-out representation of each cage measurement along the 2 racks. But let's distill this down a bit. As you can see, for both racks, the ACH set point was 50. But when the readings were taken, we found an average reading of 49.35 in the single face and 50.6 in the double face. The key data point, though, is the standard deviation of the air changes. As you can see, in both racks, this number is just over a 1, which means that the XJ racks maintained an extremely high level of airflow consistency when tested. The XJ was also tested for cage pressure consistency. As I pointed out before, the XJ can perform in either the positive or negative mode. What we wanted to confirm is that, regardless of what it was set to, the XJ stayed in the selected mode. And as you can see in the charts before you, it did. Next, I'd like to move on to the last test we'll review in the presentation, and that's the airflow velocity test. As I discussed earlier, Allentown introduces air into the microenvironment at the cage level. Recently, there have been claims made by some housing providers that this method is stressful to the rodents within due to the velocity of air that passes around them. The standard that these individuals use when making these claims is the TIS-BIFO guideline of 0.2 meters per second. As you'll see on the next slide, we had our XJ and other cages tested both externally and internally and found that the airflow velocity within the cage fell far below the 0.2 guideline. The XJ test was performed on a 160-cage rack with a full complement of cages. 6 different rack locations were tested at 50 ACH. Also, within each individual cage, 5 separate internal locations were measured at multiple heights. As you can see, the highest velocities from the 5 cage positions in all 6 rack locations stayed well below the TIS-BIFO guideline of 0.2 meters per second. As I mentioned earlier, the Allentown method of introducing air at the cage level has been validated by an impressive selection of industry professionals. I won't read their comments to you, but I will keep the next 2 slides up for a while so that you can read their comments yourself. And that concludes our presentation. Once again, I'd like to thank you for attending. If you would like more information regarding the XJ or any of the tests performed on it, please email us at xjinfo@allentowninc.com. Thank you, and good day.